What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Rough Drafts, where I go deep each week on specific topics in the current limited format. My name is Sam Pratt. Welcome to Through the Omen Paths. I'm really excited today to talk about Wonderweave Aerialist and the blue-white deck. Wonderweave Aerialist, just to not keep you hanging, is a blue-white hybrid common. So that's 2 mana. It has Ward 2, and it has flying as long as it is modified. So before the set released, I kind of took a called shot. I don't really like to put out a lot of hot takes before a set comes out, but I was really feeling good about the white cards. I had really talked myself into this when I was preparing for the deck skeleton stream with Sirkovitz. I was really high on a lot of the blue and white cards, especially the white cards, and I think they just played really well together. In my mind, blue-white was going to be the best deck, black-red was going to be the worst deck, and I thought that like green-white was also going to be good. When I got into the early access, I was soft forcing the Bant decks, so blue-white and white-green. I did quite well, so I was feeling pretty confident about these takes, and I've had a couple drafts so far where I've been blue-white, and it's felt good. I do think the format has shaken out to be white does seem to be the top color, but it's more about green-white than blue-white. But either case, I was also right about black-red kind of being in last place. I do think that green-white is the best deck, the de facto best deck, but I don't think that you should be like soft forcing green-white, like really biasing heavily towards green-white, because just with pick 2 4-player drafts, the punishment for being in the same lane as another player is so severe in this format. Like you lose access to all the gold cards because there's only 4 people at the table. They're going to go around way faster. You just get such diminishing returns from sharing a lane with someone. And I also think that the rewards for being in the open lane are really, really great. So I think that when it catches on that like white is the best color, green-white is the best deck, and people start adjusting and trying to bias into green-white, I think that the rewards for shooting for that deck are going to diminish and you're going to get really hooked up in the other colors, maybe something like blue-black. The one caveat to that is I do think that the color red in Omen Paths is a big step below the other colors for a variety of reasons that I won't go into right now. I just really don't think that it has good cards below rare or good cards at rare, to be honest. Like I have trophied with black red still. I think you can have good red decks. But I do think that one of the benefits of slanting towards blue-white, so not forcing green-white, blue-white, but sort of like biasing towards white cards and blue cards, is that neither of these colors touch red in this set. So remember, this is an allied guild set. The color pairs are like blue-white, blue-black. Neither white nor blue touches red. So if you sort of slant towards blue-white and you end up in white-green or blue-black, that's still great. So that's kind of how I'm approaching the format. And I also just really like the blue-white deck. So I'll go into detail about this deck. We're going to go through kind of the 3 parts of this deck. I think it's a fairly straightforward deck, but I want to just sort of list all the cards that I think are good for this below rare and what sort of columns they fit into in sort of constructing this deck out. So I do think that blue-white plays like a proactive Flyers deck, a Skies deck, like your classic blue-white Skies, kind of like a tempo deck. Blue-white's theme is modified, which I should probably spell out. It means if this creature has a counter on it or an aura or equipment is attached to it that you control. The last time we saw modified, it was the red-green theme in Kamigawa, and it was a pretty big flop there. There were a couple cards that were good that cared about modified, but I do think it really works well in this set because playing cheap evasive threats and suiting them up is just like a classic good way to win a game of Magic. And I think that the cards in this set that do that are just good cards. So like I said, I have this split into 3 portions. I'm going to go kind of through each of the elements to what makes this deck tick and go through them. Those 3 sections are the threats, the buffs, the modifications, and the interaction. So we're going to start in section 1 with threats. And I'm going to start off by talking about the namesake of the episode, Wonderweave Aerialist. I was really impressed with this card, both in previous season, playing with it. It does require a little bit of deck building nuance, but I also think it's a pretty strong card on its own. We can talk about the ward 2 aspect. So if this were just like 2 mana 2/2 ward 2, that's not really a big deal, like the ward 2 on a creature like that, because a Grizzly Bear is a card that your opponent in a lot of game states can just safely ignore. Like there's no pressure for them to point a removal spell at your Grizzly Bear. However, this card gaining flying when you modify it, combined with the abundance of ways to modify it, make the ward 2 really, really annoying for your opponent to deal with. If you modify it, basically every way you modify this creature, mostly its counters, any way you modify it is going to give it a stat boost. And having like a 3/3 flyer for this cheap, a 3/3 flyer, like we see a lot of 4 mana 3/3 flyers that aren't good, but like that's still like a card that your opponent has to deal with. And this becoming bigger and flying on curve is what makes this card so nice and what makes blue-white tick. The ward 2 means that your opponent has to spend their entire turn to kill this in the first section of the game. So if they need to kill this on turn 4 or even turn 5, the ward 2 means that that takes all of their mana. So you can think of the removal spells in this set. It's a small set. We can just kind of like list a lot of them. If you think about Shock, one of the upsides of playing Shock is that you gain a mana advantage from 1 mana removal. So you're on the draw, your opponent goes turn 1 go, you go turn 1 land go, they go turn 2 play a 2-drop, then you can shock their 2-drop, untap, play a 2-drop, and you've just flipped the board. That like 1 mana advantage in the early game is so important. As well as just like if you shock their 3 mana 3/2, get a 2 mana advantage, that's really what makes Shock tick. And Wonderweave Aerialist works so well against Shock on multiple axes. They can no longer get a mana advantage if they shock your Aerialist. It's a mana disadvantage, in fact. And additionally, if you modify Wonderweave Aerialist, it suddenly becomes out of shock range. It's going to get extra toughness. It's going to be like a 3/3 or a 4/4, and they can no longer shock it. And if you get it up to 3/3/4/4, stuff like Scorpion Sting, which is the 1 and a black -3/-3, they can't deal with Aerialist until turn 4 with that. If their removal spells are like Damning Caress, which is the 3 mana kill a thing if you control a villain, they can't kill the Aerialist until turn 5. Green has pretty good like punch and fight spells. They have to wait until they deploy a creature and then wait till turn 5 to deploy either of those. In which case you might be able to be prepared for that and pack like a bounce spell or something to deal with it. So the ward 2 on such a cheap evasive threat really sets the tone for the game. And making life for your opponent really annoying in subtle ways like this is really what makes these blue-white flyer tempo decks work. This is not the only cheap evasive threat. There's a couple more I want to talk about. And I think that it's not just this one, it's the density of cheap threats that makes this deck so strong, in my opinion. I'll talk about the other two that I like at common. One is City Pigeon. This is a common 1 mana 1/1 flyer. When it leaves the battlefield, you make a food. I kind of just like 1 mana 1/1 flyer for these tempo decks. Like I said, there's so many ways to modify your creatures, which we'll go into later, that starting your curve on 1, pecking in for, pun intended, a lot of damage throughout the course of the game until they can deploy a blocker, or even souping this up to like a 2/2 or a 3/3 later on in the game, makes this as well a must-kill threat, and you're still getting that mana advantage because this only costs you 1 mana up front. The other cheap threat that I really like in this deck is Phantasmal Vision. This is another common. It's a 1 and a blue 1/3 flying vigilance. It's a villain, which usually doesn't matter for blue-white, but does matter for blue-black. And when it attacks, you mill a card, which is another line of text that mostly matters for blue-black. I still really like 2 mana 1/3 flying vigilance. Like I said, this wears modifications really well. Vigilance is so good in these flyers decks. The name of the game with flyer tempo decks is often racing. Like you're attacking in the air and you're trying to like keep your opponent off balance and they're trying to like race you back and you can kind of like flip the script. Vigilance, as well as like modifying this creature, goes a long way towards stopping your opponent from being able to race you. A 2 mana 1/3 does have some issues when you run into, say, a green-white deck where you're playing against an opponent that has a bunch of web slingers, because they can pretty safely attack their 2 mana 2/2 into your 2 mana 1/3 and then web sling it back to their hand. So that is a weakness of this card, but if you can get a modification on it pretty quickly, it stonewalls a lot of the early game and can close the game pretty quickly as well. The combination of these three, as well as just playing like other cheap creatures, really makes it so that your opponent is sort of forced to deal with your cheap cards, usually at a mana advantage. And that gives you time to like hold up a protection spell, hold up a counter spell. Maybe you just like shrug it off and play like a bunch of these type of cheap threats. I think it's really the fact that there are three of these that wear counters so well that really helps this deck. I want to mention one threat that I'm not a huge fan of, which is Margot on the Case. This is one of the blue-white signposts. It's a 3-mana 1/1 double strike unblockable. I have played this card. It can be really good. It wears modifications very, very well. The reason I don't like this is because it's a 3-mana 1/1. And so much of the benefit of these cheap evasive creatures is that they're so resilient into removal spells. And this card just like dying to Shock at a mana disadvantage, dying to Scorpion Sting at a mana disadvantage, really leaves a bad taste in my mouth. I have played this quite a bit. It can be fine. It's just like, I don't really think it's a priority. I'd probably take Aerialist and City Pigeon over this in a lot of blue-white decks early in the draft. All right, we're going to move on to section 2, which is the ways to modify these creatures. The first one is Perfected Pastry. This is a 1-mana artifact that has 2 activated abilities. One is you can pay white, tap sack it to put a 1/1 counter on target creature, draw a card. The other is you can pay 2 mana, tap sack it, gain 3 life because it's a food, and draw a card. If you compare this card to Honor, which was in Edge of Eternities, which is just single white, 1/1 counter on a creature, draw a card, it kind of looks pretty bad. You're spending twice as much mana for the same effect. But if you split the cost up like this, it's a lot more palatable than a full 2 mana activation, because oftentimes this card is just coming down on turn 1 and then you just have Honor lying around. So I like this card quite a bit. I find it really helpful to maybe modify my Aerialist on turn 3 if I was able to get the Pastry on turn 1, and then I could play another 2-drop on 3. So I like this card a decent amount. I also think that in these racing situations that I was talking about, the gain 3 life mode draw card is really relevant as well. Okay, the next card I want to talk about is an uncommon. It's called Costume Closet. 1 and a white artifact, enters with 2 counters on it. 1/1 counters, that is. You can tap it to move a counter onto a creature as a sorcery. And whenever a modified creature you control leaves the battlefield, you put an additional 1/1 counter on this artifact. I think this card is great. Not a lot to discuss with it. It's a cheap way to modify your creatures turn after turn. Has the additional benefit of not running out of juice if they're able to kill your creatures. Really like this card. I think it's great. I think it's perfect for this deck. Next up is Unstable Experiment. This is 1 in a blue instant at common. You draw a card and then target creature connives. I love this card. I love this card for this deck. You can get combat blowouts if your opponent like blocks with a Leyline Weaver, which is a 2/2 reach. You can often get a combat blowout like that. If they're making sort of a sketchy block. You do have to discard a spell to get the counter, which can be a little bit awkward, but I found that this card's just fantastic. I want as many copies as I can get, and I think this is one of the better ways to modify your creatures. Moving up the curve, we have a creature now, Generous Betty Ray. It's an uncommon 3 mana 2/3 in white. When she enters, you put a 1/1 counter on another target creature, and when she attacks, target modified creature you control gains lifelink until end of turn. Lifelink is great for racing situations. This card's a really good modified enabler, works on curve with Aerialist. Not a lot to talk about, but I do want to say when Generous Betty Ray enters, put a 1/1 counter on another target creature. Does not say you control. So if this is the only creature on your side of the battlefield, you do have to put a counter on your opponent's creature. Something to watch out for. Should come up not too often, just be mindful of it. A common I really like is Principled Referee. This is a 4 mana 2/3. When it enters, you can distribute 2 counters among 2 creatures you control. So you can put 1 on the referee, which is really good for this type of effect. It also has another mode. You can return a creature with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to your hand. That mode comes up a lot more than I thought it would. One card I've played a little bit more than expected in these decks is Mob Lookout, which is a 2 mana 0/3. It's the blue-black hybrid. When it enters, target creature you control connives. So I've used this as a modified enabler, and It can work with Principled Referee to pitch one of your mana value 2 or less creatures into the bin and then buy it back later with Principled Referee. You can also do the same thing with Unstable Experiment, another connive card. The Referee also comes up a lot of times. Sometimes they just like kill all your creatures, and that makes this type of card that we've seen a bunch of times before, the 4 mana white creature that puts 2 counters on your creatures, gives it a little more modality where you can buy back a creature. So I like this card quite a bit. I think it's one of the better white commons. Let's talk about Serena Bargain Spinner. This is the blue-white uncommon hybrid card. It's 4 mana 3/2, has flying on your turn. When she enters, you search your library for an aura or equipment, put it into your hand. It's a threat on its own. 4 mana 3/2 flyer on your turn. It's like fine way to modify stuff. Really good rate if you're drawing a card. There's Hide in Mundanity, which is a 2 mana aura that shrinks something to a 1/1 and gives it Defender. I don't like that card, but that can be a good target to get with this creature. There are a lot of really good aura and equipment rares that you can get with this card. And additionally, there's an uncommon, which I'll talk about now, Robotics Mastery, that I absolutely love. This is a 5 mana aura with flash. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2, and when it enters, you make 2 1/1 Thopters. I think this card's awesome. I think it's one of the better blue cards below rare. It fits perfectly in this deck. It plays at instant speed, which is really relevant if you're also playing counter spells or protection spells, which I'll get to in a little bit. It's a fantastic target off Bargain Spinner. I really love Robotics Mastery as well. A couple more. Kumanosu the Watchful is the blue-white signpost. It's a 5 mana 4/4 artifact creature. It has vigilance, and when it enters, you put a counter on something, and whenever a modified creature deals combat damage to a player, you draw a card. Notably, that's not once per turn or whenever you deal combat damage. It triggers for each modified creature you control. You can pull really far ahead on cards with this creature if you are at like a parity board state or have a couple cheap threats. This gets really good the lower your curve is. So if you can just have a lot of creatures on board, this can buff them and trigger off a bunch of them. I love this card. I think it's really good. Kind of just does what it says in the tin. Just a couple more. Zora Spider Fancier. This is an uncommon in white, 1 mana 0/2. Whenever another creature you control enters, you gain a life. If it's a spider, put a 1/1 counter on it. This card's pretty good. It obviously depends on how many spiders you have. That's probably going to be more of a green-white thing. The Wonderweave Aerialist is a spider. I don't think I mentioned that. It probably was worth mentioning. So if you have a lot of Aerialists, you can play this on one and buff all of them, and it's really, really strong. So definitely keep an eye out for this one. Archangler's Sky Rod. This is an uncommon equipment. It's 2 mana, equip 2, an equipped creature gets 1/1 and has reach, and whenever this creature attacks, tap target creature an opponent controls. Kind of weird that has an attack ability and reach when they're so at odds with each other. I haven't personally played this. I have lost to it a couple times. I think it is probably just totally fine in these types of decks. You can tap their reach creatures, which there's like a somewhat reasonable density of reach creatures in this set. So I think this card's pretty good. Also a hit that you can fetch off Serena Bargain Spinner. And last card is another equipment that I haven't played and also haven't played against. It's Cactarantula Saddle. This is a 1 mana uncommon equipment with equip 3. An equipped creature gets +2/+2 and is a spider hero. Don't think this is great. If you're a little short on modifications or if you have like a ton of cheap flyers, I could see playing this. Also, if you just need another hit off Serena, totally fine to play too. Kind of like this card. I think it's pretty good. All right, I'm going to round out the episode talking about interaction. This should be a pretty short section. This is a small set. There's not that many interaction spells just because the set's small. So I'll just breeze through a couple that I like. One is Spectacular Tactics. This is a white common. I think it is the best white common, maybe the best common in the set. It's a 2 mana instant. Choose one. Put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. It gains hexproof until end of turn, or destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. A protection spell that modifies your creature is exactly what this deck wants. You want to be modifying your creatures, and you also want to be protecting them once you have modified them. And also, when you're racing, you usually only care about your opponent's big stuff. Like maybe you have a couple of the 1/3 flying vigilance, so you can hold off the small stuff on the ground. And then you really only need to care about like your opponent's favored fighters, which is the 4 mana 4/4. I think this card is phenomenal. I think it's the best white common. It's just so perfect in this deck. Take it over Mothwing Shroud. I think probably in this deck and green-white. Mothwing Shroud is the Oblivion Ring variant. Yeah, I love this card. An uncommon, Sudden Strike. This is a 1 white instant destroy target attacking or blocking creature. This is definitely worse than Spectacular Tactics. I think these types of cards tend to be pretty overrated. But like I said, the name of the game with tempo decks is racing, and this is really good in a race because you're more likely to get attacked when you're playing a bunch of dinky flyers. So I really like this card. Snatchback. This is 2 mana, bounce a non-land permanent with kicker 1 to blue. You can draw a card. It's just a functional reprint of Blink of an Eye or Into the Royal. Should be pretty obvious why this card is great. Bouncing a creature back to your opponent's hand at a mana advantage or a card advantage is a really big deal for tempo decks. This card's awesome. Love it in this deck. The last 2 cards I'm going to talk about are the counter spells. There is Drix Interception. This is 1 blue instant. Choose 1 or both. Counter target spell. Tap 1 or 2 target creatures. The other card is Outsmart the Amateur, which is 5 mana instant. Either draw 3 or counter a spell, draw 1. Kind of like Spectacular Tactics, where this is either interaction or protection. You can counter a removal spell. You can counter a threat. I think these work really well in your blue-white decks. You do want to watch your mana. Make sure that you're playing enough islands to reliably cast this spell. I'll also say when you're playing counter spells in a deck like this, you really want to be mindful of your curve, and the lower the better. Because the idea with a deck like this is you want to deploy a bunch of really cheap evasive threats that your opponent has to deal with, and then you have the space to hold up mana later in the game. And that's going to wrap it up. I really like this deck. I think it's pretty fun. I'm having a decent amount of fun with this set. I can tell it's not going to have a really long shelf life. That being said, I'm planning to cover it at least for next week. I have something that I definitely want to talk about next week that I'm pretty excited to talk about, honestly. And then I might do one more episode covering this format, and then I'm going to shift gears to a couple things that are, like I said, definitely limited related, but a little different than my normal content. But it's going to be good stuff, so you should be excited for it. If you want to reach out to me, you can find me on Blue Sky at sampratt.bsky.social. You can find me on Discord at samp6, and I stream very occasionally at samp_mtg. Thanks for listening. See you next week.